Hi, I'm Bruce. I'm going to show you how I made this walnut cutting board and quite a few other types of cutting boards. I was commissioned to make a bunch at once, and I'm going to show you some of the things I do so that I'm efficient at batching them out. Once you make the cut like this, all you do is stand it up on end, and then your end board will be the thickness that you want it. And they are just a hair thicker than an inch, so by the time we do some smoothing and planing, they will end up being about 7/8 final thickness, which is exactly what I want. So this is a great way to make use of a lot of material. Even if your material that you have is some scraps that are not quite thick enough, you can still get the thickness of the board that you want, but not waste as much material. The 12x18 ones I'm gonna do out of walnut with a different accent piece. So I've actually got 4/4 and more like 8 or 9/4, so it's slightly more than 2 inches thick walnut and 1 inch thick walnut. Sometimes I've found it works best to try to cut really thick hardwoods in 2 passes rather than all at once. I just cut part of the way through, raise my blade, and finish the cut. I've got all the parts cut out of my rough stock now. I'm gonna mix it up once I get to the final boards. What I've found easiest is going back and forth on the jointer, just making sure these boards join really well. I've tried doing it before you rip each strip, to save on time, and I've not found that to be beneficial. I still have to take them back to the jointer to get a real good exact glue line. One of the easiest ways to test to see if you're gonna get a good glue line or glue joint is just to take your pieces and put them together, and then actually, just put some pressure on them as if they would be clamped and put them up to the light. And if you can't see light through it, then it's gonna be a pretty good glue joint. Once you get all of the pieces nice and flat, spend a little time laying out each board the way you want it. I found this old vinyl sign that somebody was throwing out, and this is a new one. I've used something like this similarly. Just instead of having to put wax paper down or some kind of paper, I use this for my glue ups. If you can see on my clamps, I have a bunch of glue that's dripped down from glue ups in the past, and before I learned that kind of hinders the way that they work on these parallel clamps, I didn't used to cover them up, but now just get a little bit of wax paper, not very expensive, take it and just rip it in half with some scissors, and I fold that over each clamp, and it seems to work really well. This is exactly what you want to see, a bead of glue that has come out of every line very consistently. Every other one has some squeeze out in between there. It's always better to use a little bit more glue and to have to remove it than to not use enough. You don't have to squeeze everything just crazy tight, but you do want to make sure that since these clamps are underneath squeezing, you want some clamping pressure from the top as well. Moving on to the walnut, I did the same process of laying out all the boards at once. Once they were out of the clamps, I scraped off much of the excess glue and then ran them through the planer to clean them up. At this point, I've got all of the boards sanded up to 80 grit through the drum sander. So now I'm going to swap out the sandpaper on there to 120, and I'm going to run them all back through. I used the crosscut sled on my table saw to clean up the edges, and then on some of them I drilled a thumb hole at the drill press. Then I used a roundover bit in my router to ease all of the edges. The reason for spraying these down with water and raising the grain, you'll notice that your pretty smooth boards that were smooth previously now are quite rough. The fibers of the wood actually kind of raise up. Then I will do my final sanding with 220 and it will knock those fibers back down. And then when it gets wet again, it won't feel rough. So this just ensures that once your customer or whomever you're giving this board to rinses it, or wipes it down with a damp cloth or whatever, it's not going to feel rougher than when you gave it to them. You can use a number of different finishes on your boards. I happen to use mineral oil on a lot of mine. I have a giant plastic tub that I have a bunch of mineral oil in. I actually just set them down in it in a bath of the stuff for a little while and then let them drip all of the excess off. I usually let that sit overnight if possible, and most of it is soaked up the next day. It seems to give a really nice finish. The process I've found that works well for adding feet is to use a combination square, set the length that you think looks good, then I use one of the actual rubber feet to show where to mark the hole. I use a center punch to mark the hole, and then I drill out a tiny bit of material in each of the 4 spots. That way, there's no chance of it splitting. Then, I just add the screws to hold the feet. So this walnut cutting board is not the exact one that you saw me making in the video. I actually had to get rid of those very quickly because they needed them. This is another one that I have made. I sell quite a few of these, so every so often I'm making one. I really like the way it turned out. They're really massive statement pieces. I like to use these feet that are rubber feet from Home Depot. It's the only place I can find that has these. I believe they're Everbuilt brand, but they're about $2. They're non-slip. So let me know what you think in the comments below. Let me know if you make cutting boards a different way. I'd love to hear that too. So I hope you picked up a few tips from watching how I do my cutting boards. I was batching out a bunch of these at the same time as you saw, and you're able to save a lot of time that way. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time. Sweating my butt off. Whew, it is hot out here.